I think it's amazing that we have such fine representatives of the service academies. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that, of course, there are other unbelievable commissioning sources out there. The Reserve Officer Training Corps. You have some folks who get direct appointments to Officer Candidate School. You've seen brilliant examples of those commissioning sources as well. So we're not trying to play favorites for a second. It's just kind of how things have shaken out here. So, all right, a little bit of speed round of kind of get to know you kind of questions, all right, is what I want. You know, we talk about setting this up like, okay, your leadership journeys have started and are about to even really start in a big way after you graduate. So we'll get into that a little bit, but it talks about you kind of as Gen Z. Does that resonate with you at all when folks call you Gen Z? I don't know. I'm an old guy. Maybe I have that wrong. What does Gen Z mean, or does it have any meaning to you?
I don't know that I have a particularly strong sense of relationship with Gen Z, so much as I believe that our generation has certainly faced certain challenges and opportunities that other generations haven't gotten, particularly in terms of like our access to technology and information. It completely changes both the nature of how we learn in terms of, you know, when COVID strikes, we don't stop school, we just transition to online. And then as we look at the future of warfare and the operation environments that we're all going to be working in, it's going to be pretty cyber focused, it's going to be very information focused. And so how we engage in those irregular domains will really embody like what our service experience is like, more so than the past.
Okay. Les, Carolyn, anything to add on? I'm sure you do. I mean,
yeah, I could steal that.
Yeah, because you're right. Because otherwise I'm like holding on to it. I'm not really handling it. You see, I've kind of taken ownership of this mic, haven't I?
Do you want to Sure.
Is this one on? Is this one able to? Oh. Okay, you're on.
Okay. In addition to your points, I feel like it's hard for me to identify as Gen Z, especially now, all these categorizations with millennial, Gen Z, I think is just as hard for me to identify myself as it would be for you, sir. So I don't necessarily think it's best to put anyone in one box. I definitely can attribute certain aspects of myself to other generational categories, just as much as I can be categorized as Gen Z.
Absolutely, and I'll just echo what both of my colleagues up here said. I think maybe a certain Harvard sociologist might disagree with me, but I think it's a little bit, I don't know, maybe more divisive than unifying to say, oh, you're a Gen Z leader, or you're a boomer leader, or you're a millennial leader. I think personally we take pride in being able to kind of subvert those stereotypes to the point that we aren't defined by them. More so, we can adopt the positive attributes and hopefully drop maybe the negative stereotypes from that category. But I agree with what you guys are saying.
I like it. At one time, they called me a Gen Xer. I felt exactly the same way. So, okay, I'm backing up because I was supposed to be about getting to know you better. You had, well, and to make sure I have it right here, so we have North Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, right? Okay, so I don't know, we got the South well represented here, I guess, but that's okay. We won't get into that. So you probably had options. So you went to a service academy. What were your options, kind of quickly? What else was on your radar?
Frankly, not particularly. I decided, I applied to one school, it was West Point. I got in September of my senior year, and I did not look back. As a North Carolina guy, it was a pretty easy choice in terms of our state motto is esse quam videre, which means to be rather than to seem. And for me, West Point promised the offer of becoming a leader of men, and nothing against the other service academies, but the focus on leadership of people rather than leading in boats or planes or things like that. And to me, that embodied like the virtue that I wanted to pursue. And so, kind of growing up in North Carolina, we've got the 82nd Airborne, Camp McCall. That's where CAG is also stationed. So it was a pretty easy choice for me.
So kind of eggs in one basket, though. If you hadn't gotten it, you'd have been scrambling. Had you visited West Point before, that sort of thing?
Yes, sir. I'd visited. I'd done SLE.
You got to drop the sirs. I know it's going to be tough, but that's not the...
It's built in.
Yeah, very much so. But I'd done the summer seminar and SLE at the Naval Academy as well. And so I would have gone to Navy. I'd kind of started my application, but West Point was the only one I finished to be a Marine.
Same questions right down. The next time we're going to start this way and go that way, kind of shake it up here. But options
yes,
and whether you had visited Air Force Academy.
Yes, sir. So like him, I'd visited Annapolis and the Air Force Academy, and I'm sorry, I chose Air Force and not Navy, just like he did. But I was stuck between the Air Force Academy, Annapolis, and Georgia Tech. So I ended up going to the Air Force Academy. It just seemed like the best option for me. It had all the right environments and the right people, things like that I really loved and enjoyed.
That's wonderful. So I was accepted to Georgetown and the Air Force Academy, as well as the Naval Academy, and I clearly made the best choice. So.
Okay.
We had to get some rivalry going here at some
We
point.
had
Good,
to
good.
at some point. Yeah.
Had any of you been abroad? Had any of you been overseas before?
Yes.
All of you. All of you had been overseas.
Yes, sir.
Cool. Okay. Good. All right. Thought it was a fair question. Maybe not. Well, tell us something that they wouldn't know about you that you'd like them to know.
Oh, you're going to make me start this one.
Yeah,
aren't
we're
you?
going to start this way and go that way. Yeah.
All right. New Orleans, Louisiana native, right? I have not missed a Mardi Gras until I came to the United States Naval Academy, so I have some catching up to do after I graduate.
Oh, I get to go second, per usual.
Oh, okay. Next time we're going to start the center and go
Okay,
right and
just
then
to
left.
vary it
Okay,
up a
left
little,
and then
keep
right.
things interesting.
Okay.
I guess even though I claim Georgia as my home, I lived in Haiti for 11 years, so that's a pretty big part of who I am and how I perceive the world, things like
Makes
that.
me feel kind of silly about whether you'd been abroad. Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mine's not quite as exciting, but I have a twin brother at the University of South Carolina, so it's kind of a interesting, very different experience.
That is a fun fact. Could you trade out if you needed to? He could put on your get up and get away with it, or no?
No, we're fraternal.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, just curious. Okay, well, we'll get to know each other more. But I really, I think it's been a good and pretty heavy. I've certainly learned a lot today. So let's do that. What's kind of struck you? What have you heard? What's kind of on your mind, or kind of give us a visceral of what some of the things you heard are today. And we're going to start right here.
Dang it.
You asked for it.
I did ask for it. It particularly resonated with me the last panel we had. I'm very interested in Africa, as you said that you were, and it's one of my areas of focus as a political science major. And of course, we learn a lot about Chinese influence in Africa and how much they're engaging with African politics and kind of using all the resources that there is there. So it was interesting to me to see from the perspective of U.S. leaders what the U.S. can do or should do to kind of intervene with how much progress China is making in Africa. And it's always interesting to see the different perspectives. Not necessarily everyone is in agreement with the next path that we should take. But I do think Africa is a place where we should focus on. So I'm glad we brought it up in conversation here today and to see where it takes us in the future.
Very cool. Okay, we'll go back.
Yeah, absolutely. So NAFAC, our Foreign Affairs Conference 2022, our theme is going to be Partnership in the 21st Century, Aligning Values and Interests in a Multipolar World. Long title, really important issue. So kind of hearing the conversation about partnerships and how essential alliances are, not only for the United States, but for the future of the liberal world order as a whole. Every single insight is a valuable insight on that topic, and that's clearly been a theme this entire conference. So I've really appreciated that.
Henry?
Yes, I just really enjoyed the opportunity to learn more about kind of the advance in technology that's going to play such a big role in our experience in the military. In particular, looking at, we constantly get these doom and gloom type of panels and speakers sometimes at West Point in terms of, hey, the Chinese are advancing quickly, you need to be ready to engage. So, hearing some of the vignettes about, hey, maybe the PLA isn't exactly where we claim that they are. And also just, exactly where the United States is improving and how we are acting. We're actively moving towards that strategic posture that we want to be in to kind of win this global competition.
Well, let me come at it this way, I suppose. What were you surprised not to hear more about today? Something that's kind of on your mind that you think about that you didn't. Is there anything that leaps out that you expected to hear more about?
I would say, so the keynote panel, when Ambassador Howard was speaking more about, I guess, her very first point about how, China would really like it if we characterize the conflict as X versus, how the United States should characterize the conflict. I would love to learn more about messaging and the way that strategic messaging and information warfare outside of, the big domains like cyber and space, how we should speak as leaders and how we should project policy, because I know all three of us are interested in going into the policy-making realm at some point. What that messaging should be, not only with a view toward the next 5 years of strategic competition, but the next 10, the next 15, the next 50, perhaps messaging as junior officers, and then eventually as leaders in the public sector outside of the military, what that conversation should kind of be characterized as, I would say.
Okay, now I guess we're going back to our,
I honestly don't have anything that I think could have been mentioned that wasn't mentioned, at least in my mind. I feel like this conference really touched a little bit on everything that I was expecting for it to touch on, so I'm really glad. that
you'll
I
get invited
hit
back either
everything.
way, you know that, right?
Oh.
But okay.
I don't
okay,
feel like
that's good.
buttering
All
it
right,
up for
okay.
y'all, but it really was
Right.
enlightening.
Yes, I mean, I felt like everything was touched on. The one thing that I would have liked to hear a little bit more about, out of personal interest, is kind of how our debt situation with the Chinese plays into how we're able to continue to address that competition, how that affects like our ability to strategically posture, pretty much.
That's interesting. I mean, in the panel earlier this week on Afghanistan, I mean, I brought it up, but, banks, and who minds the banks, and economic and debt and all that, it counts. It counts in our personal lives. It counts kind of everywhere. You talk about messaging. We haven't talked about the pandemic much, right? And, I think I've heard some people say that change communications and messaging is the most effective way from a public health response perspective to deal with the pandemic. And I don't know, give us your visceral on the pandemic, either living through it at an academy or however you want to come at it. I mean, it's, we all are shouldering that burden, but what would you like to share, if anything?
So I was COVID case number 36 in Louisiana back in March of 2020, back when we really had no idea what was going on. My mom is a molecular geneticist by trade, so needless to say, there was a lot of hand washing in our house that clearly wasn't too successful for me. But I just have to say, and I'm sure you guys experience this too, it was certainly a challenge at the service academies navigating the COVID environment. And I think that's clearly true, not just in the United States, but across the world. I got a notification on my watch earlier that the death threshold globally has exceeded 5 million, which is terrifying and it's heartbreaking, but I think it goes back, sir, to the point of messaging and the message that can come out of this pandemic potentially being one, not necessarily of like strategic necessity, here's where we need to claw our way back, but a message of unity. And I think that's something we can take pride in as leaders and especially as future diplomats, because I think being an officer means not just being a military professional, but also a diplomat to other countries. We can take pride in taking the advantage of a world that needs to heal, of a world that has so much potential for cooperation, and I think we can push forward with that in mind.
Yeah, I think challenge is definitely an opportunity to either bring a people closer together or tear them apart. I definitely saw that at the academy, especially now with vaccine mandates and all the other things that happened in the COVID environment. It's easy to see how something so challenging could tear down the foundation of everything you've built upon. But when you use the proper messaging, when you use communication as a key, and remember that people are the focus, not just of the military, but of everything we do, then you're able to use these difficult times and opportunity to come together, to make better solutions, to just improve the effectiveness of everything that we're trying to do here. So it was really a great opportunity to see that at the Service Academy, or at the Air Force Academy at least.
Yeah, I would just echo kind of the similar message as my peers up here in terms of it was a very difficult thing in terms of that constant Homeland Security balance of security versus freedoms, and particularly at the service academies, we kind of fall on the security side of things, and so it was definitely difficult, and certainly difficult to think about how are we messaging this to the rest of the country at the academies level, and then the United States versus China, who is using information the best. I think it was a perfect example of how maybe we are not using information as well as we could be, how we're kind of losing that engagement a little bit right now with China, and that's kind of the big takeaways that I got out of it.
And not trying to drag you into politics in any way here, but climate change, is that on your mind at all, or anything you'd like to observe about that?
Always. Well, especially with Africa, I think there's a lot of forced migration, well, not just Africa, but many regions of the world. You can see how much climate change is affecting people, and it often seems like the people that are in the worst circumstances are most affected by climate change and are most subject to all the detrimental things that come with it. So I think it's even more important now than ever to figure out new solutions for how to combat this. I think we have the technology and we could do something about it, so long as we put our minds together to work towards it effectively.
Absolutely, and climate is truly a transnational issue, and that's not really a political opinion, that's more of a fact. Climate affects all nations. And exactly what she was saying, like, it is a chance for there to be collaboration and cooperation on something that's very important and something that's evident. It's not just an abstract sphere for the United States and a few allies. It is a transnational issue that I think there's a lot of opportunity for partnership on.
Yes, frankly, I think they hit the collaboration piece extremely well in terms of using international institutions that maybe originally centered on security to kind of improve our way forward with climate change, because it's going to impact our security whether we like it or not. And then additionally, just thinking about, we talk about all this advancement in military technology and how important that is for our security. But along with that, and what comes with that, is advancements in how we take care of our environment and how we can be more efficient going forward. As we've seen repeatedly throughout, military innovation often leads to other innovation in other areas, and I think we're probably going to see the benefits of that moving forward.
Okay, going to come to the audience after this question. It's the threat question, but I graduated in 1991. I think the first class issued computers, although class of 90 argues that they were, but either way. So think of that. That was how I was dealing with technology, and I was a little slow. The wall had come down, but I thought, gosh, getting ready to stop the Soviet hordes from coming through the Fulda Gap was still kind of the best thing you could do, even though it couldn't happen because the wall had already come down. So, my career, then that's what happens when you make a plan, right? But what's the, how are you viewing after today the threat? It's kind of exciting too, right? It's like, oh gosh, there's the Soviet hordes could happen or something similar to that. Of course, then Desert Storm, a bunch of other things happen. We can't predict the future. We know, nobody has that crystal ball kind of thing. But it's still, you got some sort of rubric in your mind of what kind of threat you're stepping into. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Of course, it's like the first question I asked Ambassador Braithwaite, and he responded, well, let me go check my crystal ball, what's next for the United States, right? I think clearly there's a strategic shift to the Pacific. My research mostly focuses on the transatlantic partnership, and I'm looking what exactly a North Atlantic Treaty Organization looks like in the South Pacific, right? But I think very clearly there's the strategic shift to the Pacific, the strategic shift mentally to great power, long-term pacing threat competition between China, especially, and Russia as well. But I think for me, the biggest takeaway would be that great power competition is never just about the great powers. It's never just about the United States versus China. It's about an entire world order. So that would be my biggest takeaway, I guess, for future threats.
Mm-hmm. And I think along the same lines of great power, to quote Spider-Man or Uncle Ben, I guess, great power comes with great responsibility. And going back to what General Robinson was saying, it's not necessarily about what we're going to see once we start our real leadership journey in the Air Force or in the Navy, Army, whatever, but it's about remembering why we chose this life in the first place. I'm not necessarily in the Air Force because I want to fight China or I want to do this or that. I'm here because I wanted to serve my country, and I know why I want to do this. I have a greater purpose than just fighting a war or ending a people. So if I keep that in mind, I'll be able to do whatever I need to protect the Constitution.
Leaders of character serving the nation, yeah.
Yes, and I'll take a little bit more like direct approach to the question in terms of, as they've mentioned, it's going to be a unified effort against containing a rising China. In terms of what that looks like for the Army, as we shift away from the Middle East and Afghanistan, the question is, like the question I asked Secretary McCarthy, what does ground conflict look like in the future? And I think it's an interesting question. It's a difficult question. What certainly will be happening is the use of both special forces teams and also a variety of other engagement teams to work with our allies in East Asia. As we look at like the Philippines, Indonesia, these are all places that need U.S. engagement, and that's where you're going to see Army officers. And so personally, that's where I see myself working and hopefully my peers.
All right. I know we have to have some questions out there, and it's in my interest to have you ask some questions. Otherwise, I'm going to give them the chance to ask me questions, or I'll have to cook up another one. So what do we got? Here's your chance. You don't have any questions for me until... No?
Do you want us to ask you questions?
Sure, yeah. Throw a question at me. Like, what do you want to ask some old grad, that...
Why did you get into the work that you did with Africa?
Yeah, well, There's a long story and a short story, but my wife's originally South African, so I guess that became my look into Africa. But you just realize it's worth it, right? You just realize it's much more, getting introduced to South Africa as my entry point, and just understanding the, just how much is infrastructure, potential, all that. But I'll back up. I mean, it kind of through an experience like this, these experiences are so powerful. I'll be real quick with this, but in high school, I took part in something called the Close-Up Program that took me to Washington, D.C., and they ran me around, a good civics kind of thing, and waiting to see the congressman who would eventually appoint me to West Point, when it all clear that might happen. At the time, this big, tall African came down the hallway and was testifying, and I said, well, this congressman's late, could I see this guy testify? And this is ancient history now, but maybe still worth studying a little bit. Jonas Savimbi, so at the time was, freedom fighter, leading Angola, complicated sort of thing, spoke so eloquently, which just surprised me. I don't know why I should have, but it just did. On the front page of the Washington Post the next morning, I wasn't normally in Washington to read the front page of the Washington Post. What's Angola? What's freedom fighter? How is this connected to kind of proxy wars and battles and competitions out there? And it just kind of inspired me to learn more. You couldn't read much about Angola without learning about South Africa and Africa in general. Then you get to go to a place like a Service Academy where you can take classes that really broaden your horizons on that. And I did that. I got to grab the classes that I could. I wasn't an Africa specialist, but I still did classes. Then when opportunities presented down the line, I ran across people that, I went to Afghanistan. How does Afghanistan get you to Africa? The four-star general I worked for as advisor was an Africa guy. He runs the Brenthurst Foundation for the Oppenheimers in South Africa. He's got a book out called Expensive Aid at the moment. He's an expert on that. Now, he was there helping in Afghanistan because he's just that kind of an expert, right? But you got to meet that guy, and then that took me to Africa. So that was kind of a convoluted response, but these relationships you're making now, everybody senses that. You never know how it kind of weaves you back into it. So. All right, see, that wasn't very good. You got to ask them questions. They're better, so nobody. Okay, here we go. I could run you out of mic.
Thank you, sir. As someone who sat in your seats not too long ago, I'm curious to hear what are you most excited for in your upcoming years of service, and what makes you most apprehensive?
I guess I'll start since she's our OIC. The thing that I think I'm most excited for is working with the peers, not only that I've developed here, but soldiers out in the Army. Like I said, the entire reason that I wanted to join the Army and be an officer is because I like working with people, and the opportunity to lead people really excites me. So I think that's going to be a great experience. And I think that's certainly, I'm sure my peers can attest, that's really the best part about the service academies, and I'd say the Army and military in general, is the people that you meet are just incredible. And so I think that's going to be an awesome experience. The part that I'm most apprehensive about is, as we kind of transition away from Afghanistan, as I brought up in the Army, the question is, how much is the nation going to value the Army? Does it see it as a necessary deterrent for great power competition? I would certainly argue yes, as you heard Secretary McCarthy argue yes, but I do wonder whether or not that attitude is going to persist at the highest levels of government, and if it doesn't, how that might impact my experience in the Army. It could be less than beneficial.
I think what I'm most excited for, as you were saying, Henry?
Yes.
Yeah, is just working with amazing people that I know are in the Air Force and across our sister forces as well. That's going to be very exciting for me, to just work with them and learn from them and their experiences. But that's also the most terrifying part, because I know that as an officer, I'll have to be in charge of all these people and lead them in the right direction in situations where I won't necessarily be the expert. So it's always tough to have that balance of not knowing what I'm doing, but also being in charge of everyone and telling them what to do. So that's definitely quite terrifying.
Yeah, definitely. In our ethics and leadership courses, we talk about quite a bit. We talk about managing personal responsibility, command responsibility, and the constitutional paradigm. A lot of very big, lofty ideas that literally just mean this is how you lead yourself, this is how you lead your people, this is how you relate to your ideals. So I'm most excited, I would say, just like my colleague said, about leading people and interacting with people. That's what I've loved the most about the Naval Academy. That's what I love the most about the service that I'm hoping to join in naval aviation. That's what I love the most about the Navy and the Marine Corps as a whole. We call it deck plate leadership over on the Navy side, and I don't really know what the Marines call it, but they do it a lot. But I would say that's what I'm most excited for is the people. I think what I'm most apprehensive about, more so than anything else, is being able to balance my capacity as an officer and my capacity as a leader for the United States with my capacity as just a human being. And so I think work-life balance, I'm sure, ma'am, you know, it's a challenge for any officer, a challenge for any leader, but I know that it's going to take practice. We don't necessarily get a lot of opportunity at the academies to be, you know, real adults, so to speak, but it's going to be a challenge, but I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to embark upon it.
Carolyn, Liz, Henry, let's give them a round of applause. I think our country's in good hands. I kind of knew that going in. I feel that even more after this.